Hello, I am Kieran. I have some disabilities and medical conditions, which means that even though I can walk, I do sometimes use a wheelchair. This means that I have witnessed firsthand the problems caused by a lack of disabled access, so I am doing this film to highlight the issue. Some of this film will be filmed from my point of view in a wheelchair to show the problems wheelchair users face. What do you enjoy most about going out? Is it going into shops and browsing around the aisles and selecting what you want to buy? Or perhaps meeting up with friends for a coffee? Unfortunately for many disabled people this is not possible, as a lack of disabled access means they cannot access many stores and services and are left feeling like they are not part of society. The Equality Act of 2010 means that all retail premises, transport hubs, etc. should offer access to people with disabilities. However, this is unfortunately still not the case, leaving people like me facing struggles to access places on a far too regular basis. The Equality Act 2010 states that employers, stores and local authorities must make reasonable adjustments for people with disabilities by, for example, providing level access to buildings if they do not have it to begin with. However, businesses often feel under no full obligation to comply with this act, as if a company does not put measures in place, then it is down to individuals to complain about this to the company. If the company then refuses to take action, the individual then has to take the company to court, which many cannot afford to do. Because of this, many places remain inaccessible to people in wheelchairs or with other mobility problems. In this film I will visit various places and look at the contrast between the locations that are actually trying to help with disabled access compared to those that are still far behind. I will also revisit what is in my opinion the most inaccessible town in Norfolk I have ever been to, which is where I will start off at. This is Holt, a North Norfolk market town that last time I visited I dubbed the most inaccessible town in Norfolk I had been to, as I could literally get into one shop. Now let's see if anything has actually changed. This car park does look good for disabled access, as it has several disabled spaces as well as disabled toilets. However, the problems start as soon as you leave the car park. This pavement is too small for my wheelchair to fit down, and even if the pavement was wider, there are steps sticking out into the pavement, so you still wouldn't be able to get down in a wheelchair. And also all of the shops down this road also have steps leading into them, which makes them inaccessible to people in wheelchairs. This corner shop has a step leading into it, meaning if you were in a wheelchair you would not be able to access it. And even if it didn't have a step, there are several displays in this shop which would mean you wouldn't be able to get around it in a wheelchair. Things don't improve the further round Holt you go. This pavement is actually accessible to people in wheelchairs. However, the town council building / tourist information has a step leading into it, so that means that the town council is inaccessible to anyone in a wheelchair. I contacted Holt Town Council regarding Holt's lack of disabled access. They then sent me this statement. Sorry to hear that you struggle to find Holt easily accessible. The good news is that the Town Council have recognised this as an issue and have a number of ongoing projects which look to create safe, accessible and open spaces within the town. The first project is that the Town Council will be installing a number of dropped curbs in the town on behalf of Town Council. Their work is due to take place in the next few weeks. As soon as the work has been completed, I will let you know. The other project is a more long-term project which will look to create a more public realm space in the town. Kind regards, Gemma Harrison, Town Clerk. I have not, however, heard anything regarding this work, and in doing my filming and looking at the pavements in Hull, they do not seem to have improved. This shop has a ramp onto the step leading into it, but it doesn't have a ramp leading up to the step, so you still are unable to get into it if you're in a wheelchair. This bank does have a ramp leading into it, so disabled people can get money out of the bank in Hull. Problem is, you just can't spend it in the majority of the buildings. This is the main department store of Hull, which's front entrance is not accessible because it has steps and a very heavy door. I did, however, think the back entrance was accessible, but in going round to look at it, it turns out it isn't either, which means that the main department store in Hull is completely inaccessible to anybody in wheelchairs or with mobility problems. This toy shop was the only building I was able to get into last time I came. This shows how long ago it was since I last came to Hull, as I was a young child. I was hoping to see some improvement in Hull since the last time I came, but most of the buildings are still totally inaccessible, and even the ones that do have level access have very heavy doors. This would be the only building I would be able to get into if I was in a wheelchair on my own, as it has an automatic door. Also, disabled people are putting their lives in danger, so I was filming. I've seen people in wheelchairs and mobility scooters having to go on the road as the pavements aren't wide enough for them to fit down. I am now in Cromer at the About with Friends community cafe, where I'm going to meet with a couple of members of staff. Can you tell me a bit about your charity and the work it does?
Our charity is a charity in Cromer that helps people with learning difficulties and disabilities to lead the life they choose.
I think you summed that up brilliantly then, George.
Yes.
So we have loads of different things. We run social activities, which George is a part of. This is part of our work skills programme. So we have a cafe, a community shop. We also run a commercial kitchen that does outside catering. We have a carpentry unit, so where we do upcycling the furniture and make stuff for our shop. We also have the contract for the local council office's canteen, so that's another part. We do lots and lots of things.
Yeah. Yes. Elliot, could you tell me sort of specifically what your role within the organisation is?
So my role is head of catering, so I'm in charge of our cafe, our commercial kitchen, and then the canteen we have up at Norfolk District Council.
George, could you sort of tell me more about what you do within the charity?
Well, I'm currently part of this transition group, which is members who might struggle a bit on the adult group at first when they leave the youth group. So we have a transition service. It's a bit like youth and adult, but it's mainly aimed at members aged 18 to 25. And you go on various programs and activities like bowling, swimming, and as well as visiting new places. And I also am part of Work Skills, where I work at the council offices Thursdays, and I'm here at the cafe on Fridays. So it just gives me a good experience of like going out, meeting friends and gaining independence, as well as doing the most important thing I love, cooking.
I have just been filming in Holt, which does not have good disabled access. What do you think of the access here in Cromer?
So the disabled access in Cromer, again, it could always be better. I mean, in this cafe we try to be as sort of accessible as possible, but I know that again it is an area which could always do with improvement. Like I think I was discussing earlier, there was funding being put in place where there'd be a full sort of adult changing area to be put in one of the cafes, which is probably about 200 yards away. But again, there could always be more places.
Yes. Your charity helps people with disabilities and health conditions. Could you tell me what it's like for these people and the challenges they face?
So some of our guys sort of, it's more the physical side of things,
yes.
So it's assisting them in learning how to sort of cope with the day-to-day aspects of dealing with, I don't know, hygiene, transferring, sort of giving independence. So trying to teach a lot of our guys that just because you're in a wheelchair doesn't mean that you have to be the person in the
No,
wheelchair. You
definitely
are
not.
that person first, and then you just learn to tailor your life and how you do things to being in a wheelchair.
What do you think needs to be done to make the lives of disabled people easier?
I'm going to be, it's going to sound a bit big-headed, more places like this, sort of more day sessions. Yes,
Well, that's perfectly understandable, that's
so
fine.
with the cafe we try and run like, everyone is welcome.
Yes.
So when people come in, they don't see it as a cafe that's run by people with learning disabilities. It's a cafe first, and then it's nice when people come and go, the cafe's great, and then they go, oh, we didn't realise that you were here, or what you were about until you actually explain it to them.
What more do you think that shops, businesses, etc. can do to make their premises more accessible?
Just again, wider doorways. I know we try and make it toilets as well, making sure that they're wheelchair accessible, having everything there. So in our facilities, we like to make sure we have everything there that you would possibly need, and also space. I think the space is a big thing, especially when people are using wheelchairs.
Yes, definitely. Because obviously earlier in Hull, Hull has quite a lot of pavements that aren't accessible for wheelchairs, and it's kind of obviously a big problem. So.
Yeah, of course, a lot more sort of drop curves, and it's just making things a lot easier. But again, looking at things on paper doesn't necessarily help, but then the practicalities, sort of paper doesn't always transfer to the practical side of things when it gets put in place.
I will now go to Wymondham, another market town, to see if their accessibility is any better. I am hoping for a better experience to Hull, as there are people putting pressure on to try and get disabled people the necessary access they need. But how much better will it actually be? So as you can see, this building is completely inaccessible for anyone in a wheelchair. As this door is too narrow for a wheelchair to get through, I have managed to get stuck in this doorway in the past. And this doorway has 2 steps leading into it. However, this building would be able to be made accessible, as all it would need is either a wider door in the first doorway or a small ramp in this one, so that people in a wheelchair would be able to go down into it. At least the pavements here are wide enough for a wheelchair to get down, unlike Holt's were. This bakery is also inaccessible to anyone in a wheelchair, as it has several steps going up leading into it. This bakery does sometimes serve people who cannot access the building outside. However, this then stops them seeing what is available to be bought in the shop, and then makes them feel excluded as they are unable to access it. The entranceway could be changed quite easily by adding a simple ramp up these steps to allow wheelchair users to actually access the building. This charity shop has actually changed to allow it to be more accessible by adding this ramp. Savers also has level access to allow people in wheelchairs to be able to easily get into it. This building looks very inaccessible, as the building is very old and has steps leading into it. However, due to the age of the building, they are unable to update it to add a lift. Instead, they have now added this bell, so then anybody who is in a wheelchair or disabled and cannot otherwise get up the steps to access it can then ring the bell, so then a member of staff will then come down and deal with their request. I came to Wymondham railway station to look at the lack of disabled access on the actual train platform. However, there is also taxis parked in front of all of the disabled spaces. The railway station is completely inaccessible to people in wheelchairs or with disabilities due to the footbridge. I am lucky in the point of view that I can get out of my wheelchair and walk, but I am not particularly good at climbing stairs, So even I am still unable, despite not being in the wheelchair, to use this station as I cannot get up and down the stairs. Wyndham Access Group is an organisation that has been doing protesting to try and make this station accessible, but as of yet, as you can see, there is still no disabled access to the station. I can get on this platform and watch a train, but due to the lack of disabled access, I'm unable to actually get onto the train. Now I will go to Norwich to compare the accessibility of a city to that which we have seen in towns. In contrast to the two towns, Norwich is a city, so hopefully it may be more accessible due to more funding and a higher population. Most of the shops in Norwich are actually accessible to disabled people. This means that they can actually do socialising and go shopping themselves, and this in turn makes them actually feel like they are part of society. This building has made adjustments, so it is now wheelchair accessible. Norwich shows that positive change is possible and that things can be done to help disabled people, as Norwich City Council have made improvements to the city centre to make it more accessible for disabled people, for example by adding this ramp. However, there are still some parts of Norwich that are totally inaccessible, as I cannot get down Elm Hill in a wheelchair. The pavements are far too narrow and uneven. I know this is a historic street, but it only needs some adjustments to the pavements to enable disabled people to enjoy this historic area. Norwich is definitely an improvement, with most shops having level access, meaning disabled people can go and do shopping for themselves rather than needing someone to do it for them due to not being able to get into the shop. It's just a shame it only seems to be the bigger cities that actually seem to be accessible. I contacted my local MP regarding the lack of access within Norfolk. He then got in touch with the Minister for Levelling Up Communities Inequalities, who then sent me this statement. The Equality Act 2010 protects people who have a long-term physical or mental impairment that substantially affects their ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. Where a person's condition fits this definition of disability, a service provider cannot discriminate against them and would have an anticipatory duty to provide reasonable adjustments to ensure the disabled person does not experience a disadvantage compared to their non-disabled counterparts. This could well include installing a ramp at the entrance of a business premises so as to aid access by wheelchair users. Parliament intended the 2010 Act to guide the policies of service providers as well as providing legal protection. Failure by a service provider to comply with the Act means that people who feel that they have been discriminated against can use other provisions within the Act to seek redress against a non-complacent service provider, including going to court if necessary. This is the case for all other protected characteristics in the Act, and the government has no plans to amend this process. The duty to make reasonable adjustments is unique to disability discrimination legislation and is considered a cornerstone of it. It creates a powerful, flexible duty to ensure that disabled people are entitled to the same opportunities as everyone else, without imposing unreasonable burdens on wider society, employers and service providers. In the field of services, it is also an anticipatory duty, which means that those who provide services to members of the public are expected to anticipate the reasonable adjustments that disabled customers may require. The statement then goes on to say, "We believe the Act offers robust protection, and where service providers fall short, effective remedies are in place." As shown, there are vast differences in the levels of disabled access in different areas. I was still really disappointed in Holt for not improving its access, especially as a lot of elderly people live in Holt. I know an elderly lady that lives in Holt who says they never go into the town because it is too inaccessible for them. Wyndham similarly needs to take greater steps in making itself accessible. Norwich has more national chains who have a greater profit margin, so can afford to make their premises accessible. However, this does not make it right for small local companies to not be accessible, especially if all they need is a small ramp. Also, if these small companies made their premises accessible, they would in turn get revenue from disabled people who can now access their stores. This means that disabled people who are often the least able to travel are forced to if they do not want to shop online due to their local area not having the disabled access they need. Unless the government updates the law so companies are held fully accountable for not providing access, which the government currently does not intend to do, then there will never be equality for people with disabilities, and people like me will forever feel like they are not part of society as they cannot access basic stores and services that most people take for granted.